So are you going to go out with her? Silence. Hello? Earth to Nora? I heard you. And? I stared at the cup of coffee in front of me. The foam was starting to collapse at the center. I watched it like it was the most important thing in the room. I don't know. She put her fork down. I could feel her looking at me from across the table. That look she always had when she already knew the answer, and was just waiting for me to catch up. You don't know if you want to go on a date with a woman who walked up to you in a bookstore and asked for your number. Right. A cute woman. I didn't say cute. You didn't have to. Another silence. Longer this time. I picked up my coffee, set it back down without drinking. It's not that simple, Jade. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, and tilted her head just slightly. That was the look. The one that said, "You're about to lie to both of us, and I'm going to let you do it, but we both know what this is really about." I know what you're thinking. You're thinking the story is about the woman in the bookstore. It's not. It never was. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Jade and I had been best friends for 6 years. 6 years. That's longer than most of my family members have managed to stay in the same zip code. That's longer than the lease on my first apartment. Longer than my previous job. Longer than the version of myself that used to think she had it all figured out. We met in our junior year of college, in a film theory class neither of us wanted to be in. I remember sitting in the back row with a coffee I'd bought mostly because I needed something to hold. The professor was talking about the male gaze. I was writing in the margins of my notebook. Little sketches, mostly. The thing I do when I'm listening but don't want anyone to know I'm listening. Jade sat down next to me 15 minutes late, dropped her bag loud enough that half the class turned around, looked directly at the professor and said, completely unbothered, "Sorry, parking was a disaster." The professor didn't respond. Most people would have shriveled. Jade just opened her notebook and started writing like she'd been there the whole time. I looked at her. She looked at me. She said very quietly, "Is he always this monotone?" I said, "This is actually a good day." She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. And that was it. That was the whole beginning of us. We spent the next 6 years the way people spend time with someone who feels inevitable. Roommates for 2 of those years. Then separate apartments on the same street. Which sounds like a coincidence, but really wasn't, because when Jade found her place, she called me before she called the landlord back. And the first thing she said was, "It's 3 blocks from you, and the closets are huge." I asked if that was the real reason she was taking it. She said, "The closets, obviously." We had our rhythms. Saturday coffee at the same diner we'd been going to since graduation. Sunday phone calls when one of us couldn't sleep. The kind of friendship where you knew which drawer the other person kept her backup charger in. Where you knew how she took her tea. Where you knew not to ask about her sister on days when the weather was bad, because something about gray skies made old wounds feel closer to the surface. I knew Jade the way you know a city you've lived in long enough. Not perfectly, not all at once, but bone deep. The way you know which street floods first when it rains, which intersection has the weird light timing, which coffee shop is worth the detour. She knew me the same way. Maybe better. People always assumed we were together. Old professors, new coworkers, strangers at parties who watched us talk. We'd learned to deflect it with such ease that the deflection had become its own kind of ritual. The matching look, the small laugh, the "we're just friends" that came out smooth as a script line. I never thought about why it was so easy to say. I never thought about why she always let me say it first. We worked in the same part of the city, her at a design studio, me at a small literary magazine where I did everything from editing submissions to writing captions for the website. Our offices were 12 minutes apart. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, when her lunch break lined up with mine, we'd meet at the deli on Caldwell Street and share a table by the window and talk about nothing important for 40 minutes in a way that always felt like the best part of the day. That was us. That was who we were before the bookstore. before a stranger named Priya held out a copy of a novel I'd been reaching for at the same moment she was, laughed, said, "Seems like we have the same taste." And then, after 5 minutes of talking about the book, and then about the neighborhood, and then about nothing in particular, pulled a business card from her jacket pocket and said, "I'd love to get coffee sometime, if you want." I took the card. I didn't know what to do with it. I called Jade from the parking lot, and that's where the story really starts. Not with Priya, not with the card, not with the way my hands were slightly unsteady when I unlocked my car. It starts with me calling Jade before I even pulled out of the spot. It starts with the fact that that was my first instinct. It always was. I told her the whole story on the phone. The book. The Transit of Venus. Which I'd been meaning to buy for months. The way Priya and I had reached for it at the same time. Her laugh, which was the kind of laugh that made the whole aisle feel like it had more air in it. The card, which I was still holding, pressing between my thumb and 2 fingers like I was checking whether it was real. Jade listened. She always listened the way people who are paid to pay attention listen, completely, without the small grunts of acknowledgement that most people offer to prove they're following along. When Jade listened, you felt it. There was a specific quality to her silence that felt like a held breath. When I finished, she said, "She sounds great." "She was nice," I said. "Are you going to text her?" "I don't know. Maybe. Maybe is interesting. Maybe is just maybe." But she said, "interesting," with a specific kind of lightness, the kind that isn't light at all. I thought about that word the whole drive home. We had dinner at her apartment that Thursday. She made pasta from scratch. Jade cooked the way she did everything, with a focus that was almost aggressive, like the ingredients owed her something. I sat on the counter the way I always did, and talked while she worked. We talked about the bookstore, about Priya, about whether I was going to respond to the card I'd now moved from my purse to my kitchen counter, and then back to my purse and then to the little dish by the door where I kept my keys. "You've relocated this card 3 times, Jade said without looking up from the pasta. "I'm processing." "What's there to process? Either you want to get coffee with her or you don't." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" I watched her hands move. She had good hands. Steady, efficient. The kind that knew exactly what they were doing without any ceremony. She was wearing a gray Henley, sleeves pushed up to her elbows. Her hair was loose, and there was a strand of it that had fallen forward across her cheek, and she hadn't pushed it back yet. I looked away. "Because," I said. "What if it's weird? Why would it be weird? I've never—" I stopped. "I mean, it's not like I've never— You've kissed girls before, Nora. That was college. College is not a different country." It felt like one. She finally looked up. Her eyes were very steady, dark brown, almost black in the kitchen light. She looked at me for a moment without saying anything, then went back to the pasta. "You're allowed to want things," she said. "That's not complicated." I didn't say anything, but something in my chest moved when she said that. Something small and precise, like a key turning in a lock so old you'd forgotten it was there. I texted Priya on a Friday evening. We made plans for coffee the following Wednesday. She was warm and funny over text, the kind of person who put real thought into what they wrote, who asked follow-up questions. By Monday, I was looking forward to it. I texted Jade to tell her. She took 45 minutes to respond, which was unusual. When the message came through, it said, "That's great. Let me know how it goes." Short. No exclamation point after the period. No follow-up question. I stared at it. I told myself I was reading into nothing. But then there was Saturday coffee. We were at our usual table. She was quieter than normal. Not dramatically, not in a way that would register to anyone else, but I knew her rhythms well enough to feel the difference. She laughed when I was funny. She asked questions about my week. She drank her coffee and looked out the window and was entirely present. But something was slightly off in the frequency of her, like a radio station that's almost tuned in but not quite. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm great." She smiled. "You seem..." "What?" "I don't know. A little quiet. I talk a lot. Being a little quiet is probably healthy." I let it go. But I didn't let it go, not really. I carried it with me the way you carry a song you can't place, hearing it in the back of your head all afternoon after we said goodbye. Walking to my car, I kept turning it over. Was she tired? Was something happening with work? Was it her sister? I ran through every possible explanation. I didn't arrive at the right one. Not yet. Wednesday came. Coffee with Priya was easy. She was bright and interesting. She had strong opinions about books and architecture. She made me laugh twice in the first 20 minutes. She asked good questions. She was clearly attracted to me in a way that she made no effort to hide, which I found, honestly, more disorienting than uncomfortable. I called Jade on the way home. She picked up on the second ring. "How was it?" "Good," I said. "Really good, actually." A beat. "Are you going to see her again?" She asked. I said I'd think about it. Why think about it if it was really good? The question was reasonable. The question was perfectly reasonable. I knew it was reasonable, and I knew I should have a reasonable answer to it. And the fact that I didn't, the fact that I was standing in the street outside my building with my keys in my hand and no answer, that should have told me something. Instead I said, "I don't know. I'm just not sure she's what I'm looking for." And Jade said very quietly, "What are you looking for?" I opened my mouth, closed it. "I'll figure it out," I said. She let me get away with it. But something in the silence that followed, 3 or 4 seconds of quiet, which was long for us, long enough to be its own kind of sentence, something in that silence felt like standing at the edge of something I didn't have a name for yet. I went inside. I stood in my hallway for a long moment after the door closed. I didn't text Priya back. Here is what I know about the things we don't say. They don't disappear. They don't dissolve just because we refuse to look at them directly. They settle. They take up space the way furniture takes up space. You stop seeing them. You walk around them automatically. And then one day someone rearranges the room and you realize how much of the floor was occupied all along. I had been walking around something in my chest for so long that I had built my entire life around the shape of it. I had organized my days, my conversations, my habits around it. Not to avoid it, I told myself, but just because that was the natural lay of things. The natural lay of things. I had been telling myself that for a very long time. It started showing up in small ways. The way I noticed her coffee mug. We each had a mug at the other's apartment. Mine was at hers was at mine. I'd had hers for 4 years. Blue, a little chipped on the rim, the word, "however," printed on it in big serif letters because she'd found it at a flea market and thought it was hilarious. I'd washed it hundreds of times. I knew exactly how it looked in my dish rack. Knew the weight of it when it was full. Knew it the way you know something that belongs to a particular version of your days. One morning I took it down from the cabinet and just stood there holding it in both hands. Thinking about how she'd bought it because she found it funny. Thinking about how she'd left it at my place because she wanted something of hers here. Thinking about how the chip on the rim had been there since the 2nd year. How neither of us had ever mentioned replacing it. I put the kettle on and told myself I was just tired. The way I listened to her. I'd always been a good listener, but I noticed, somewhere around that 2nd week after the bookstore, that I was listening to Jade differently. Not more attentively, just more consciously. Like I was aware, suddenly, of the particular things I was choosing to notice. The way her voice changed when she talked about something she loved. A project that was finally clicking. A film she'd seen twice. A book that had gotten under her skin. Something opened in her voice when that happened. Like a window. The way she laughed when something caught her genuinely off guard. A quick, unprepared sound, different from her regular laugh, which she had more control over. The unprepared one was shorter and higher, and she always covered her mouth after. The way she said my name. I know that sounds like nothing. People say names constantly. It's a basic feature of language. But I kept noticing it, the specific way she said Nora. Not just as a dress, but as something else. With a kind of weight. Like my name in her mouth meant something slightly different than it meant anywhere else. I kept noticing it, and then telling myself I was making things up. The afternoon, everything tilted. And I don't know what else to call it, because it wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't the kind of thing that earns a scene in a movie. It was just a Tuesday. The afternoon, everything tilted. We were on her couch. We'd both had long days. I'd come over with takeout. We were watching something on her laptop, some documentary neither of us was fully paying attention to, and at some point she pulled a blanket over both of us and leaned her head briefly on my shoulder. Just briefly, the way you do when you're tired, the way we'd done 100 times. And then she didn't move. She stayed there, her head on my shoulder. I could feel the weight of it, the specific pressure, the warmth of her hair against my jaw. I looked at the laptop screen without seeing it. My heart was doing something I didn't have language for. It wasn't racing exactly. It was more like it had changed its rhythm entirely, like it had decided, without consulting me, to operate on a different frequency. I didn't move. She didn't move. The documentary said something about glacier formations. I stared at the ice. I thought, this is just us being comfortable. I thought, this is what 6 years feels like. You relax into each other. It doesn't mean anything. I thought, you are not about to do whatever you are clearly about to do, so stop it. And then she laughed softly at something the narrator said, and I felt the laugh against my shoulder, and I thought, oh no. That was the beginning of the bad weeks. Not bad because anything was wrong. Bad because nothing was, and I couldn't figure out what to do with that. I started tracking the geography between us, the distance, the closeness, where her hands were, where her eyes went. I'd always been physically comfortable with her. We were touchers, both of us, the kind of friends who sat close and hugged hello and fell asleep on each other at movies without thinking about it. Now I thought about it. Now I was hyper-aware of every point of contact, and every absence of contact. Every moment she was near, and every moment she was across the room. It was exhausting. It was also the most vivid I'd felt in a very long time. I texted Priya and told her I'd had a nice time, but that I didn't think I was in the right place to start something new. She was gracious about it. She said she understood, wished me well, said maybe she'd see me at the bookstore. I put the phone down. I thought about Jade. I thought about the way she'd looked at me when I said, "It's not that simple." I thought about the 45-minute response time. I thought about the word interesting. I thought about all the times over 6 years that I'd said, "We're just friends," and how easy it had always been to say. I sat on my kitchen floor, which is a thing I do when I'm thinking something I'm not sure I'm ready to think. Something about being closer to the ground feels stabilizing. I sat on my kitchen floor and I tried to be honest with myself. It took a while. Here is what I eventually admitted. I had been in love with Jade for longer than I had any language for. I didn't know when it started because it hadn't started. It had just always been there, underneath everything. The thing I'd built the floor of our friendship on top of without acknowledging what the foundation was. The friendship was real. The love was real. I hadn't known for years that the word for what I felt was different from the word for friendship. Or maybe I'd known and chosen, very efficiently, not to know. But sitting on my kitchen floor with the overhead light too bright and the takeout containers still on the counter, I finally stopped choosing not to know. I loved her. I was in love with her. And I had absolutely no idea what she felt, except for the 45-minute text response, and the word, interesting, and the specific way she said my name, which was a very thin thread to pull anything from. I sat there for a long time. Then I got up, threw away the takeout containers, and went to bed. I didn't sleep. The following week was when I started to pull back. Not dramatically. Not in a way she could call out directly. Just slightly. I was a little less available. I replied to texts a little slower. I declined her invitation to come over Wednesday evening with an excuse about a deadline that was technically true, but wouldn't have stopped me any other week. I told myself it was just space, that I needed room to figure out what I was feeling before I let it get any closer to her. That I was being responsible, actually, that this was the reasonable thing to do while I sorted myself out. But here's the thing about pulling back from someone who knows you, as well as Jade knew me. She noticed on day 3. "Are you okay?" she asked. We were on the phone. It was a Thursday. "I'm fine. You've been a little, I don't know, not quite here." "Work stuff," I said. A pause. "Okay," she said. She didn't push. That was the thing about Jade. She didn't push. She would ask once, clearly, and then she would give you the space you seemed to need, and she would wait. She had a lot of patience. And I was using all of it. 2 weeks after that, she called me on a Sunday. It was late, past midnight, which wasn't unusual. We'd always been night call people. And her voice when I picked up was different, quieter. Like she'd been holding something for a while and it had gotten heavy. "Can I ask you something honest?" she said. My heart did the thing again. "Yeah," I said. "Of course. Did I do something wrong?" The question landed somewhere below my sternum and stayed there. "No," I said immediately. "God, no. Why would you think, because you've been different for the last few weeks?" She said it without accusation. Just fact. And I keep telling myself it's work, or it's the Priya thing or whatever, but that's not. I don't think that's what it is. And I'd rather you just tell me if I did something. I pressed my forehead against the wall. The wall was cool. I focused on that. "You didn't do anything," I said. "I promise. It's me. I'm just in my head." "About what?" The question sat in the air between us. There were so many answers to that question. There were 6 years of answers. There was the specific warm weight of her head on my shoulder, and the way I'd felt the laugh against my arm, and the way she said my name and the 45-minute text and the word interesting, and all of it. All of it was right there, perfectly available, perfectly ready to be said. I said, "Just figuring some things out." She let out a slow breath. "Okay," she said. But it wasn't okay, and both of us knew it. The okay was a temporary structure, something to stand on while we figured out whether the ground would hold. We stayed on the phone for another hour. We talked about other things. We were good at talking about other things. But when we hung up, I lay in the dark for a long time. I thought about what it would cost to keep doing this. The half-presence, the careful management of myself, the constant performance of a version of things that was almost true. I thought about what it would cost to stop. I didn't sleep well for a long time after that. But before I tell you what happened next, if you've made it this far, it's because something in this story recognizes something in you, that particular ache of wanting to say something and not knowing how to start. So do me a favor right now. Hit the like button. It takes 2 seconds and it helps me keep bringing stories like this one to you. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe right now and hit the bell so YouTube notifies you when new stories drop on this channel. Now, I need to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever pulled away from someone because getting closer felt too dangerous to handle? What did that cost you? Write it for me. I read every single one. And tell me, what city are you watching from? I'll heart every response. Okay, back to Nora. Here's the thing about distance. It has a way of producing exactly the clarity you were trying to avoid. A month of careful management, of texts I took a breath before sending, of Saturday coffees where I was entirely present in my body because I was working too hard to be present, of phone calls where I measured out everything I said. A month of all of that, and I was exhausted, and no clearer and no closer to a version of my life that felt like anything other than a performance of fine. And then Jade got the call about her mom. Not a crisis. Not the worst thing. But her mom had been in the hospital for a minor procedure that had gone less minor than expected, and she was scared in that specific quiet way that Jade was scared. Not crying, not collapsing, just suddenly very still. She called me at 7 a.m, and her voice was so carefully controlled that it told me everything. "She's okay," she said immediately, before I could ask. "She's okay. They're just keeping her an extra night. I'm coming over. You don't have to... Jade." A pause. "Okay," she said. I was at her door in 18 minutes. She let me in, and I could see it immediately. The careful stillness, the set of her jaw, the very composed way she was standing in her kitchen like she was just making coffee. Just a regular morning, nothing to be concerned about. I didn't say anything. I just walked over and put my arms around her. She held on for a moment, and then another. And then she let out a long, slow breath against my shoulder. And for a second, the stillness broke. Just for a second. Just the slightest tremor. And then she steadied. "She's okay," she said again. Into my shoulder this time. "I know," I said. We stayed like that for a while. And in that while, with my arms around her, and her breath against my shoulder, and the morning light coming through her kitchen window, I stopped managing myself. Just like that. Just completely stopped. The way you finally put down something heavy after holding it for so long you've stopped feeling the weight. I just held her. And understood, very quietly, that I had been here all along. That this, her, me, this specific gravity between us, had been the realest thing in my life for years, and I had been working very hard not to know it. We spent the day together. Her mom got better news by noon. We drove to the hospital to visit in the afternoon, sat in a room that smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee, while her mom told us both, at length, about the night shift nurse who she found personable and the other nurse who she found insufficiently personable, and Jade sat in the chair beside the bed and held her mom's hand and smiled. Not the performed version of the smile, the real one, the one that came up slow and quiet from somewhere underneath. I watched her, and I thought, I have watched her like this 100 times, and told myself it was just because she was my best friend, and I loved her the way you love someone who is your whole world, and I was right, except about the part where I told myself that was all it was. We drove back to her apartment in the evening. She made tea. I sat on the counter, the way I always did. The kitchen was quiet except for the kettle. "Thank you," she said, "for today. You don't need to thank me. I know I don't have to. I want to." She set the mugs down. Mine, her regular mug, the blue one from my cabinet, the one that said "however," which she'd apparently brought over at some point without either of us marking the occasion. My mug, in my hands, which she'd given me without ceremony. The way you hand someone something that belongs to them. I looked at it. I looked at her. And she looked back. And something in her expression. Something in the way she'd gone very still. The way she was watching me with a specific, careful quality like she was reading something she'd been trying to read for a long time, told me that the 45-minute text response and the word "interesting" and the way she said my name were not, actually, nothing. "Jade," I said. "Yeah. I need to tell you something." Her hands were wrapped around her mug. She didn't move. Okay, she said. I set my mug down on the counter. My hands needed to be free for this, for some reason. I needed to not be holding anything. I've been pulling away from you because I figured something out and I didn't know what to do with it. And I kept thinking I needed more time, or I needed to be sure, or I needed to... whatever. I had a lot of reasons. I stopped. I'm in love with you. I think I have been for a long time. And I know that changes things, and I'm not saying this to make things weird or to put anything on you. I'm saying it because I can't keep carrying it around and having it sit between us when you don't even know it's there. The kitchen was very quiet. She was looking at me with an expression I didn't have a word for. Her eyes were bright. Not tearful, just very, very present. Like something was happening in her that had wanted to happen for a long time. She didn't say anything for a moment. And in that moment, in the 4 or 5 seconds of her silence, I understood that this was the thing about telling the truth. You can't put it back. You can't make it not have been said. You said it, and now it exists in the world, taking up space in the air between the two of you, and either it brings something back or it doesn't. I waited. What came back wasn't what I expected, which is to say, I expected some version of I love you too, and I expected it to feel like a resolution, the way things resolve in movies, neat and closed and certain. I did not expect it to be messier than that. I did not expect it to cost anything, because I'd already told myself the cost was in the telling, not in what followed. That was naive. What Jade said was, I know. 2 words. She said it quietly and clearly, and with a weight in it that made my chest tighten. You know, I repeated. I've known for a while. Not all of it. Not your exact version of it. But I've known that something was there. On both sides. She set her mug down very carefully. I've been waiting for you to figure it out. How long have you been waiting? A small smile. The real one. The slow one from underneath. Long enough, she said. I let that land. Why didn't you just... Because it had to be yours to say first. You needed to get there on your own terms. She looked at me very directly. And because I was scared. I'm not scared now. I want to be honest about that. I looked at her. What are you scared of? I'm scared that we go down this road and it breaks us. That we change everything, and then we can't find our way back to what we were. She folded her hands around her mug. I've thought about this a lot, Nora. More than I've let on. And I've thought about what it would mean. Not just for the good parts, but for what happens when it's hard. When we're in a fight, and the stakes are different. When one of us needs something the other one can't give. She paused. I love you. I've loved you for years, and that's exactly why I'm not making this easy. I stood there with all of that. She was right. She was absolutely right. The concern was real. The risk was real. None of what she was naming was irrational. And here is what I thought, standing in her kitchen with the kettle still warm and her blue mug on the counter. I thought about the cost of not saying it. I thought about all the months I'd spent managing the distance between us, all the energy I'd spent performing a version of fine, all the weeks of lying awake at night and sitting on my kitchen floor and talking around the thing that was real. I thought about Priya, who was lovely and had done nothing wrong, and how I'd stood in that coffee shop and known, in the back of everything, that I was somewhere else. I thought about what I would lose if I chose the safe version. And I thought, the safe version is not an option anymore. I already said it. I already put it in the air between us. The safe version ended the moment she handed me that mug. I know it's a risk, I said. I know all of that is true. I've thought about it too, and I'm scared of the same things. I looked at her steadily. But I'm more scared of 6 more years of not saying it. Of being right here. Exactly like this, watching you and saying nothing. I took a breath. I don't know what this looks like going forward. I don't have a plan. But I know that whatever we build it honestly. That's the only thing I'm sure of. Jade was quiet. The kitchen was quiet. And then she looked down at her hands, and then back up at me. And she said, "My sister is going to have absolutely no idea what to do with this information." And I laughed. I laughed in a way I hadn't laughed in weeks. The sudden, startled kind. The kind that comes from somewhere you forgot existed. And she was smiling now. The real smile, full this time. And she walked around the counter toward me, and I stepped down from it, and we were face to face in her small kitchen with the evening light behind her, and 6 years of everything we'd been to each other right there between us. She reached out and took my hand. Just that. Just her hand around mine. "We do this carefully," she said. "Yes. We talk about it when it's hard. Yes. And if it changes things." "It already changed things," I said. "Everything already changed. I'm just asking if we get to see where it goes." A long moment. Her thumb moved across the back of my hand. Small. Careful. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah." Like it was the simplest word in the language. Like it had always been right there. "I want to tell you what happened next. I want to describe everything that followed. The weeks of figuring out something new inside, something old, the conversations at 2 a.m, the way everything familiar looked different with a different name on it. The things that were hard. The things that were easy in a way that surprised both of us, in a way that felt like relief rather than revelation, because the truth is it had always been this. We'd just been calling it something else. But I want to tell you something that matters more than the details. I lost something that night. I lost the version of myself that organized her whole life around not knowing what she felt. The version that said, "We're just friends," before anyone could ask. The version that had learned to call the floor around something heavy just the natural lay of things. I lost the fluency I had in not saying. And that loss was real. There was a grief in it. The way there's always grief in finally letting go of a protection you didn't know was costing you anything. And I gained myself back. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But in pieces. In the weeks that followed. In the conversations that got to be honest. In the Friday mornings when I drove to her apartment and didn't perform any version of anything. I got myself back. And here is what I know now, that I didn't know then. The bravest thing I ever did was not saying, "I love you." Saying it was easy, comparatively. The brave thing, the thing that cost me something real, was choosing to be whole instead of safe. Some people I'd relied on for a sense of belonging went quiet when they found out. A few women in our extended social circle who had opinions about appropriate, who had very structured ideas about what friendship was supposed to look like, who needed things to fit cleanly into the boxes they'd been given. They found this messy. They found it inconvenient. I found that I could live with their inconvenience better than I could live with my own silence. My whole life, I had been a person who made things easier for other people. I smoothed things over. I chose words carefully. I occupied the space I was given without pushing on the edges of it. I had called this maturity. What I understand now is that it was fear. I chose, in Jade's kitchen on a Tuesday evening in November, to stop being afraid. She was worth that. I was worth that. It turns out, in the end, that those two things are the same sentence. I'm not going to tell you it was perfect. Nothing worth having ever is. But I will tell you this. There is a specific feeling that comes when you finally stop running from yourself. When you look at the thing you've been avoiding and realize it's not a cliff. It was just a door. I walked through the door, and I found my whole life on the other side. If this story reached something in you, if you've ever stood in a kitchen holding something you didn't know how to say, write the word courage in the comments. That's how I know you made it here with me. And if you want more stories like this one, click the video appearing on your screen right now. Big love, and until the next one. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description.